The end is the beginning. This is episode 1.
You're listening to 70s Trek with Bob Turner and Kelly Casco, the fan podcast that looks at Star Trek in the 1970s. It was the decade that built a franchise.
Welcome to 70s Trek, the show that looks at all things Star Trek related in the 1970s. I'm Bob Turner.
And I'm Kelly Casco. This is a great time to be talking Star Trek. 2016 is the 50th anniversary of the original series, and there's a lot of interesting things going on in the franchise right now.
Boy, there sure is. And with so much going on, it just seems natural to take a look at the early days of Star Trek after the show was canceled. It was a really important time, and it sort of set the path. It was at a really important time, and it sort of set the stage for the rest of the franchise.
Yeah, most people think that Star Trek died in 1969 and then came back in 79. But they don't know all the things that happened in between. Well, there was a lot, and this show is going to take a look at all of that.
But since this is our first episode, we have to ask, where do we start? Well, how about this? At the end of the original series. And, of course, it was, Kelly, the only series. There was no animated show. There were no movies. I mean, it's hard for us today in 2016 to think about that. There were no movies, no TNG, no DS9 or Voyager, no Enterprise, and of course, what else?
It was definitely nothing to do with JJ's verse.
That's right. It's hard to imagine that this time existed, but it was a time when Star Trek was largely thought to be dead to the world, and it didn't seem like it had any future at all, did it?
Definitely not. So why don't we go back to the end?
Good idea. Let's go back to a time that transformed this dead show into a multi-billion-dollar franchise. The Vietnam War is in full swing. The U.S. has nearly 550,000 troops stationed there. President Nixon just took office weeks before for his first term, and the nation has not heard the word Watergate yet. But what the nation did hear recently were the voices of 3 U.S. astronauts aboard Apollo 8 just a month ago, and they were orbiting the moon for the first time ever. If you like music, you're probably kind of grooving to I Heard It Through the Grapevine. Did you like that use of that word, grooving?
Yeah. Did they have little raisin guys singing that?
Not that. No, that came later. But that song is at the top of the Billboard charts. And at the movies, we were going to see True Grit, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Midnight Cowboy. And there's a new guy playing James Bond in the movie On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And there's this new film everybody's talking about. It's kind of different. It's called Easy Rider. It's 1969, January. Star Trek is in the middle of its 3rd season. And it's just been canceled. Ugh. That's where our story starts. It kind of stinks to start at the end like this, doesn't it?
Definitely.
But it is what it is. This show, and tell me if you think I'm wrong, Kelly, but this show, I think more than others, it seems like it's got so many stories attached to it. I mean, how often have you heard about a TV show that had a second pilot ordered? Because the first one was too good for TV.
That's incredible.
Yeah, or this show that's so different from any other show on TV has to go back into its original pilot and make a 2-parter because they're running out of episodes in season 1 and they don't know what to do. I mean, that's some real big drama there. Things are so bad. They got to go look at the canceled pilot and pull that into season 1 and make a story somehow with their current characters. Lots of interesting urban legend, I guess, that surrounds the show. Even what happened after season 2. Don't you think that letter writing campaign thing is... When else have you ever heard something like that happening?
Well, not during that time, at least.
Yeah, it's so different. It's so unique. And that's why you would think a show like Star Trek that has all of these sort of first time or legendary stories attached to it, it would have a happier ending. It doesn't. In the 3rd season, there's some strife between Roddenberry and the network. Roddenberry leaves the show, and the network sticks it on Friday nights at 10. You know, if you think about who was watching Star Trek at that time, it was high school guys and college guys. What are they doing Friday nights at 10? Same thing you and I were doing in college, Friday night at 10.
What were we doing?
We weren't home watching Star Trek.
Oh, that's right.
So let's just take a little bit of time and talk about how all of this unfolded. Yeah, you kind of looked into it a little bit. Tell me what you think was going on at that time.
Well, so, you know, everybody learned that Star Trek was canceled in February of 69. You know, it was listed as a show that was not returning in the fall. NBC canceled, you know, other things like Get Smart. How could they cancel?
Wait. Get Smart.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, man.
You know,
what am I going to do with my shoe phone?
I'm using mine right now. They canceled Jerry Lewis, The Outsiders, The Ghost and Mrs. Muir.
Do you remember that show?
I love that show. I watch that show all the time.
I know, we watched it as a family. It was a cute show. We liked it.
Yeah. They canceled things like The Mother-in-Law and My Friend Tony.
You know, and it's funny too, because the official story from the network for canceling the show was ratings. That's the first thing they claimed. It didn't perform well. And if it's okay with you, I wouldn't mind talking about that a little bit.
Go ahead.
This show seems... Thank you. This show seems like it had trouble all the way through, at least with ratings. At least that's the official story. I took a little time and I did a little digging. There's a couple of ways to look at ratings. The first is, what place did it finish in its time slot? Was it? And at that time, this is a really easy number to come up with. Let's see. There's ABC, there's CBS, and there's NBC. Okay, that's 3. There were 3 networks to look at. So a show either finish 1, 2, or 3. So that was pretty easy. And then there's the share, and that is quite literally the percentage of TVs that we're watching, the share of the television audience that was watching at that time. So I just kind of dove into every episode, and I looked at the place of each episode, 1, 2, or 3, where it finished, and the share it was pulling. And you know what? This show performed a solid second almost all the time. And in the first season, it was blowing shows away. In the first season, check this out of 28 episodes, it finished first in 8 of them. So that's about 28% of the time.
Wow.
It finished second 50% of the time. 14 episodes finished second. There were only 6 episodes that finished third. So you've got 78% of the episodes in season 1 that finished 2 or higher.
Wow.
And the average share for those shows was a 30. Almost over 30% of the viewing public was watching Star Trek in the first season. And those are some very quality episodes, I think.
It's one of the best seasons.
Absolutely. It is. So let's look at the second season real quick. So there were 25 episodes in the second season. Finishing first, there were 12%. That's 3 episodes. There were 15 episodes that finished second. Again, very solid, 60%. And then there were 7 episodes that finished third. So a few more episodes finishing third. at 28%. The share was 26.5%. It's still over a quarter of all of the TV sets watching Star Trek. To me, that's pretty respectable.
That's solid.
It is. So I can't understand why the rumors persist about NBC looking at canceling this show after the second season. It's just the strangest thing ever. And it, of course, precipitated the whole letter writing campaign. But here this show is finishing in the top 40. It is a solid second place. It was going up against some pretty tough competition. Some of the shows in season 2 that were finishing first, hold on to your pants here. While Star Trek was pulling in the 20s, they were pulling in the 40s and 45s. So it was really big competition.
Yeah, right.
So the fact that Star Trek even came in first at all was really a big deal for some of those time slots. So I have no idea why there were rumors that this show would have been canceled after season 2. It wasn't. There was a letter writing campaign. Supposedly that saved the show, and it went on to season 3. Now there's the whole argument between NBC and Roddenberry about a bunch of stuff. Mainly it was the budget. They cut the budget for season 3. It was already tight. And they went and they wanted to cut the budget again. And Roddenberry said, hey, come on. If you do this, I'm going to walk. And they did it. And they called it his bluff. And, Roddenberry being the guy he was, well, I guess I'm walking, He was kind of out of a job. So in season 3, check this out. All right, only 2 times do they finish first, right? That's 8% of the shows. That's not so great, but it's, you won some of them. Friday night at 10. Our audience isn't there Friday night at 10, so you're not going to win that time slot very much. But again, they finished second 12 times. That's 50% of the episodes. Finished second. That's not bad for a time slot that doesn't have your audience. And again, they're pulling, check these numbers out. Some of these numbers were impressive as far as the shares go. There was a 36 in there. That was Spock's Brain. Spock's Brain, the first episode of the season, pulled a 36. The Empath pulled a 33. There were some decent numbers in here.
Yeah.
Day of the Dove pulls a 28.5. Elon of Troyes pulls a 28.
So it's still pretty consistent from the previous year.
Yes, there's some fall off. The number 3s, the number of 3s has risen from 7 to 9. So there's some fall off. But it doesn't completely go over the edge of the cliff. It's still a very solid second. So it really kind of blows me away that NBC decided to cancel this show. When you look at these numbers, when you see that, again, it's in the top 40 again, and it's finishing solidly in second place for the majority of the episodes, 50% of the episodes. So I don't know. You hear NBC or explain that, well, it's because it didn't perform well. And I kind of think to myself, really?
There's something else going on there.
There's something else going on, perhaps. Perhaps it had to do with Roddenberry, and we just touched on that. The fact that he didn't get along with the execs. The execs didn't get along with him. That's no secret. It's no secret Roddenberry didn't like the NBC execs. The show also, Kelly, tell me if this might be a decision for canceling a show. It was $4.7 million in debt at the end of season 3.
Yeah.
And they didn't see a way of ever getting it to a point where it was profitable. 4.7 million, that's about 30 million in today's dollars. And they kept just accruing debt from episode to episode, just rolling it over. I mean, I kind of think that might be one of the bigger reasons.
It probably had a huge factor there.
Probably, I'm sure Paramount, by season 3, Desilu had sold to Paramount. I'm sure Paramount and both NBC probably looked at this going, wow, how do you make this work? I don't know how to make this work. Maybe we just ought to end it. That could be a reason too. I don't know. What do you think?
I just wish it never ended.
Well, you know what's interesting too is this show, by the rules of syndication, never should have gone into syndication. Typically, a studio will only allow a show with 100 episodes. I think the rationale was, we need that many for there to be for it to be on every day, so people don't get sick of seeing the same things. We need at least 100. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense.
That's a total guess on my part. I have no idea why 100 was the rule. It seems like it might be that. And so without 100 episodes, they decided to send it into syndication anyway, because I think they were hoping somebody somewhere will buy this show. I don't think anybody thought it was going to do well, though. There's a quote from Herb Solow. He wrote a book with Bob Justman called Inside Star Trek sometime in the 90s. I think it was 96. And in it, he says, at the time of the series Cancellation, any entertainment industry figure who predicted there could ever be Star Trek profits would have been immediately incarcerated in the nearest asylum for this severely insane. It was that bad. That's pretty severe, man. I don't think anybody thought it was going to pull out. So go figure.
What do they know?
Yeah, right. I'm sure you've heard this story too. We were talking about these interesting legendary stories that surround Star Trek. A year after its cancellation, Nielsen is the ratings company that counted all these numbers up. Nielsen decides to change how they're counting. Prior to, I think it's 1970s when the change came. Prior to that, it was just the audience size. They just counted bodies in front of the tube. In 1970, they started using demographics. And for the first time, they were beginning to get a picture of what kind of viewers were watching which kinds of shows. And so they had an idea of who the audience was really for the first time. And suddenly this idea of males, 18 to 35, and the fact that they bought stuff, they were decision makers and buying decisions. Wow, that really jumped out at them. This group, this males 18 to 25, let's start finding TV shows that they watch and will move lots of advertisers toward them. So, what shows? Yeah. And of course, the lore, the legend is that Nielsen, when they were explaining this to NBC, says, and oh, by the way, you canceled what would have been your most profitable show in this group, Star Trek. Nice going.
So there's some justice in the world.
Go figure. So I've got to think, as the 70s move forward, as Star Trek gets into syndication, we all know this story too, and Star Trek begins to really grow in syndication. With this news from Nielsen as well, you've got to think that NBC was going, oh, crap. What did we do? How can we get this back on the air? Start talking to Roddenberry. I'm sure that was part of their thinking. Geez, we let this thing slip by. We had it in our hand. We could have sold this to advertisers. This could have been a great moneymaker for us. Boy, did we blow it.
So did they talk to Roddenberry?
Yeah, but we'll tell that story in another episode.
Okay.
It's funny. I think it was a bit of a tsunami for Star Trek too. Guys our age, we're that sort of second generation of Star Trek fan. Obviously, the first generation was when the show was on network. The second generation is us. We grew up with it in the 70s. We were positioned, I think, at the right time. I think viewing habits had changed as we, guys our age, are coming of age. We're growing up with TV for the first time. Our parents didn't. Our older brothers and older sisters did. But I think that syndication was also maturing too and becoming more prevalent. And so all of this content was there for us to consume as we were growing up. And man, did we consume it.
Yeah, a little too much.
Maybe that explains a lot. Yeah. Anyway. So yeah, I just think it was this perfect storm for Star Trek. And the content was good, don't get me wrong. And it pulled in a great audience, and it was so stinking unique. There was nothing else like it. but it just fits syndication perfectly. I mean, how many times did we sit down and watch the same episodes over and over? It didn't matter that the syndication schedule had repeated. We didn't care. Oh, yeah, this is the one with the rock creature and Abe Lincoln. I'm watching this.
Every time it's on. It didn't matter what episode.
Right. So, I mean, it was never far out of the public's consciousness. It was never allowed to be. We'll sort of spend some episodes setting the table. And I'm talking to our listeners now, all two of you. We'll sort of spend some time setting the table. We'll sort of talk about the original series a little bit. As it moved into the 1970s, we'll talk about things like in 1970, what did we know? We'll set that table. Here's all we knew. You know, in 2016, after all of these different shows and after all these movies, there is so much Star Trek lore. You know, they even write encyclopedias about it. In 1970, we didn't have that. We had 79 episodes, and that's all the information we knew. So we'll sort of talk about that a little bit. Also, as we move through this podcast, we'll talk about influences, which I'm really looking forward to that. There are some key influences that impacted how creators of Star Trek, and when I say creators, I mean Roddenberry plus some other producers and writers. There are things that influence the audience as well, and we'll talk about those things, TV shows or movies or whatever, other books. So we're not only going to look at just Star Trek, but Star Trek related stuff through the 1970s. I think it's going to be a fun ride. Hey, thank you for listening to 70s Trek. We're very excited about this show. We're really excited about some of the great topics that we're going to be discussing as we move forward. You can find our show on Facebook. Just search 70s Trek. And there's also a very cool Facebook page called Star Trek in the 1970s. And we'll be talking with folks from that Facebook page as well. They post some really cool stuff. Toys and posters and all kinds of cool things from the 70s. So if you're looking for cool content like that too, go check them out. That's all we've got this week. Kelly, any final words?
Live long and prosper.
Oh, I love it. And I grok Spock. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to 70s Trek, an independent fan production. Join us next week as we explore more about the production, the actors, the producers, and the influencers of Star Trek in the lost decade of the 1970s on 70s Trek.